Hi, so I'm going to be critiquing this lesson, and the reason for this lesson is to introduce idioms and phrases to students and show them how they can use it in their day-to-day lives. So what I would like to first start off with is the objectives. So for this objective, the terminal objective, the students will be able to correctly use common idioms and phrases in a sentence and combine sentences using idioms or expressions in a coherent story. So I would give this a 3 just because these objectives really do overlap with each other, but they go together enough to where it makes sense. So one is just using common idioms, and the other one they kind of have to create or understand why certain idioms go together. And so what I would do to fix this term, the objective, is I would take off should and replace it with will. And I will also take out be able to correctly, just because I feel like it adds a little bit more pressure to the students itself. And the enabling objective is the goal to have students prepare for communication in real world situation by using common expressions and collaborate with peers to accomplish shared goals. This would be seen in any real world job. I would give this a 4 just because these objectives are really going off one another. And if you see later on, they really do follow the objective, especially in the order as well. And so what I would do to fix this objective is that I would take out this would be seen in any real world jobs just because I feel like it's not needed. And I do feel like the enabling objective does go into the terminal objective as well, or it does lead to the terminal objective just because it kind of prepares them and makes them kind of understand the use of these idioms and how to put them together, which is what you want to see in your terminal objective. And it does reflect a communicative aim in the classroom. So the next part is the procedures. So for the introduction, they want to have like a small talk with students and maybe throw in a couple of phrases and idioms just to see if students will kind of break down and think why exactly they're using it. And this activity is included just because it introduces like bits of what they will be talking about in their next lesson, and it kind of gets their thoughts turning a little bit. But they don't really learn much from it just because they aren't really aware of the idioms until it's actually presented to them. And the introduction is done for the purpose of reminding students of the last lesson and just showing them what they will be learning. But it's not really a communicative activity just because the students aren't engaging themselves. It's just the teacher. And so for the first actual activity of this lesson, they were going to be going over a handout that's going to have a whole bunch of idioms and phrases listed on it, and they're going to go one by one what the meaning is, and they're going to be asked if they've heard of it, which I really do think that it's kind of communicative if they actually do participate in it and say, well, I remember hearing it from this place and this is what I thought it meant, or I wasn't too sure. And they kind of learn about the ones that are listed and maybe how they could kind of use them in their actual life. And this is a really good starter because it allows them to be aware of the sayings itself. For the second part of the activity, it's going to be a teaching demo itself. So the teacher is going to pick 2 or 3 words out of a bowl and they're going to make a sentence out of it, and this is used just so students will know how to do it themselves when they're put into their groups. And the students do kind of learn of what's kind of going on, how the teacher's making the sentence, and why, if they really do go into depth of why they picked that certain sentence for these words, and the students won't really be lost. But it's not really a communicative activity just because the students themselves aren't really engaged in creating the sentences themselves. It's just the teacher. Now for the third part of the activity, this is where the student actually does it themselves. They're put into 4 to 5 people per group, and they have to pick one note card from the bowl and, make a sentence out of that. And the reason for this activity is just so that they could practice on how to make idioms and phrases, but this also allows them to think outside of the box and ask themselves how they can make a sentence. And they can use the word in like a variety of meanings and ways, so this really does help them as well. And it's mainly done just to promote creativity. And this is a communicative activity just because students will have to think how these words can be put together, and if they don't know, they can ask their friend or group member as well. So for the fourth part of the activity, students will be instructed to make a story out of these sentences that they have, and this is included just so students could actually really think and work together on how each of the sentences that they created can be put together and actually used in the right context. Because if you know a lot of idioms, that's fine, but if you know how to use them, that's what really matters. And so this is a communicative activity just because students really do have to talk to one another, and they have to try to make the story fit together, or else it won't make sense. And so for the fifth or the last part of this activity is just the closure, and this is actual presenting. So students are going to the group is going to go up and present their story, and so on and so forth. And so what this really does help with is to show students how each of the groups kind of showed what they learned, and maybe they could kind of just build off from one another, like, oh, maybe you could use it in this way, or you can use it in that way. And the last part of this lesson plan is just an introduction for the next class, and just giving them a little thought to leave off on. It's not really an activity itself, it's just an introduction to the next lesson. And this is kind of important just so students can be aware of what they're going to learn next and probably be a little prepared if needed. And then the last part of this is just assigning homework, and this is really important in any classroom setting just because if you don't assign them homework, they're not going to know what to do, or they're going to forget. And that's basically the importance. It's not really a communicative activity unless you assign the homework a certain way. So now that I kind of discussed all of the lessons in a little kind of short blurb, I really do like this kind of lesson plan just because it does flow well. It goes from showing what representing what exactly is an idiom or phrase, and then going on to showing them examples of it, and then doing an activity to where the teacher shows it first. They have the student kind of start off small with a sentence, and then they build up to like the bigger part, which is a little bit more harder when you have to work together and create sentences out of random sentences that you already have, and then showing your classmates what you learned, which is a really good thing. So, however, even though this is a really good flowing lesson plan, there's one thing that I would really like to change, and it is right after the students make their own sentence, I would hope that the teacher actually stops class for a minute and shows them how to do the next part rather than just kind of leaving them to do it on their own, because they don't really know how to put the story together. So even though the teacher made a couple of sentences out of them, it would be nice to see her come up again and be like, well, this is my logic on how to put the sentences together, rather than just leaving the students to do it on their own. Also, with this activity, I feel like it doesn't this lesson, I feel like it follows through the presentation, practice, production, and the engage, study, and activate format, just because it kind of jumps around between the two. So while the teacher is presenting, she is also trying to get the students to engage, as you could see when she was starting the small talk. She added a little bit more of the idioms and phrases just to see if the students would respond back in a certain way, or he or she. And then during the body, you can see as they go over the handout, which I guess you could say is a little bit of the practice, or well, the studying, it's more studying and engaging as well, because they are trying to get the students to understand and maybe connect with stuff that they've heard before in the past. And the production and activate, they kind of go together, and students are actually showing what they learned and doing it, maybe studying it a little bit more, and then presenting it for everything. And so this is my little critique of the sample lesson.